Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together, we are Kenny and Renny. This is the Kenny and Renny pop-up show before the beginning of the season here. We wanted to check in a little earlier than we have in years past, kind of check into training camp, give our thoughts. A little bit of a different training camp this time around. I think there's a lot more questions about what's going to happen, a lot more kind of up in the air. It's been said that there's opportunity for youth at this camp. So I think it's worth the weighing in, as did fine Ken Wiebe next to me here. So we're going to do that before we officially start kicking off the KNR season, which will launch, of course, after the first game of the season, the first regulation game of the season. That is, looking forward to it. Lots to announce to you. Some really interesting conversations to be had about some of our sponsors here. There's a couple things we're really excited. We'll get to it. I'm just teasing it a little bit here, but there's a lot of things that.
What about my song? What happened here?
Well, you didn't check yourself out of the show, so what?
Okay, pardon me. Preseason,
you could not do your job. Oh, look at the ego on this guy here. Wants his song played so bad that he's going to screw up and check himself into the show early and check out so you can hear his song. So here you go, everybody. So we can stroke Ken's ego because he's missing it for the summer. Let's bring in Kenny. Hey, everybody, look at that. Ken's here. Surprise, surprise. How'd that happen?
Hey, Tristan Rivers is in the chat, buddy. And when Tristan's here, we play the tunes. This is nothing about ego, Mr. Okay. I've got my hair on the middle of 32 Thoughts here. Come on.
Oh, speaking of, we'll have Elliotte Friedman on the show here. I thought I was supposed to be the diva on the show here. Clearly, Ken's cheering that up. But if anyone missed out on it, my hair became commentary on the 32 Thoughts podcast, likened by new host Kyle Bukauskas as Huey, looking like Huey Lewis, that bastion of 80s sexuality, who I've been trying to mimic my entire life, and then described later on by Elliotte Friedman, who will be on this show as being a himbo. Sean Reynolds, a little bit of a himbo. Said I was a good-looking guy. If I'm a himbo, then that's basically all I care about. Said that I was a good-looking guy, so I guess I got to take that because that's what a himbo would take. But we'll get into that a little bit later when Elliotte comes on to the show. But before that, Ken, I'd really like to dive in before Elliotte does get here. There's a lot of different kind of things to get into with training camp here. It's an interesting one. Let's start off right off the bat with Cole Perfetti, who made his season debut on the ice with the Winnipeg Jets officially today after signing a 2-year bridge deal with an AAV of 3.25. Give me your take on where this landed. Is this about what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that after what we had heard plenty of rumblings about where the two sides were coming from, I thought it might eventually reach 3.5. That was kind of my max, even though I know that the floor for Perfetti's camp, I think they wanted it to be a little bit higher than 3.25, but I mean, ultimately, it wasn't worth quibbling over, $250,000 a year, if you will. And we understand that's a big amount of money still, but I think it's just important for Cole to be in camp and getting himself squared away here with his new line mates, getting settled into his new spot on the power play and those sorts of things. So I think ultimately both sides gave a little bit, Sean. I think again, everyone's going to try to rush to judgment who won the negotiation, but I think it's a significant raise for Cole. And I think the Jets also moved off of, I think that they would have probably preferred it to be a little bit closer to 3. We know there were tons of comparables on both sides that were being offered and, speculated about. But ultimately, I thought that Cole said it best today, Sean. Cole has 2 years to prove, that he can be a 6 or 7. He didn't use the numbers, but I'm pretty sure that when you read between the lines, Cole made it pretty clear that if his progression continues, he has 2 years to prove himself to be a top 6 forward. And if he is a productive top 6 forward, he will be making north of $6 million on the next contract. So, although I'm sure he would have preferred a little bit more security and he was open to the long-term deal, I think the numbers are fine for both sides. I think it's pretty fair to suggest that Cole is probably going to outperform this contract in terms of the production value. But at the same time, I mean, I can understand the reasons for the slight hesitancy is probably not the right word, Sean. But I can understand why the Jets want it to be closer to $3 million. And here's the other part. I mean, Cole had very limited leverage here. We've talked about this a ton. Cole had a very solid overall season. 19 goals, 19 assists, 38 points, 71 games played. But it was a, split in 2 season, essentially, where he was a point a game player for the majority of the first half of the year. And it was a pretty quiet second half until the late surge. So for me, I thought you asked a perfect question, and I'm going to be happy to put you over right now, Sean. Asking Cole flat out if he felt he had something to prove. And I love the fact that he embraced it 100% and said 100% he feels like he has something to prove. He knows that he's probably going to be a 20-goal guy this year. He also knows that he went a quarter of a season without scoring a goal and only having 2 assists during that stretch. So I liked what I saw from Cole. I liked what I heard. He put on 8 or 9 pounds of muscle in the offseason. The biggest benefit for Cole is that he had, May until September to get ready. He's ready. I thought he looked good on day 1. Now, again, it's going to take him time to get up to speed slightly, but I think it came into a position that's, pretty solid ground, middle ground for both sides, even, if Perfetti probably right now feels he gave a little bit more than he took. But I think that the biggest thing for him is that he's going to spend the next 2 years proving that he deserves more and that he wants to be around for a long time.
Loving the hair comments, by the way, people keep them coming. Have to say, loving the Vittorio Rossi suit, because as you can see, you can still, even though it's party on the top, it's business as much as it gets on the bottom. This is the only way I can pull this off, is having this like this, Frankie and the boys making me look like a sophisticated gentleman in spite of my attempts to not look that way. And hey, if you want the kind of suit that can make you look top notch no matter what you do on the top, go see Frankie and the boys down in Vittorio Rossi. Tell them Kenny and Renny sent you. Walk in loudly, proclaim that Kenny and Renny sent you. They'll do you up right. I think this is just a straight up win for the Jets. I don't know that they wanted to, like, there was an expectation that they could go too much lower than 3.25. I think you're 1,000% right. Cole Perfetti had no leverage here. The only leverage that could be carried into this, I think, was the idea that was really put forth by Rucker McGroarty's team this year, that the Jets are somehow bad with their young prospects and young players. So those folks who really kind of buy into that narrative, I think, looked at this and this really bothered them quite a bit. There's no place to go here if you're Cole Perfetti. You're probably heading to a bridge deal. I've said all along it's going to a bridge deal. That's what makes sense. He got knocked out of the lineup last season. Whether you agree with that or not, that's what happened. Went quiet for a large swath of the season last year. Has had 2 pro seasons that were injury plagued. He needs to prove that he can stay healthy. He needs to prove he can take the next step. He needs to prove that he can produce, but he also needs to prove that he can produce throughout the entirety of the season, so that a team that thinks that it is in a position to win a Stanley Cup doesn't feel like they need to go and replace him in the roster, which they did last year. Bridge deal was perfect for that. If he was going to wait that out, all he was going to do was eat into the time, if this bled into the season, eat into the time that he needed to prove himself and get that next contract. This was all the Jets leverage in this situation. And I think it shows in the number. I think, I think if there were truth serum on both sides, the Winnipeg Jets would be very happy at the number they got him at. Cole Perfetti's camp would not be so happy with the number that he came in at. That said, from a perspective of someone on the outside, I think this is the right deal. It's the right deal for the Winnipeg Jets. They get a player that, like you are saying, Ken, I think is going to outstrip that contract, but needs to because you play for what you earn. It's later in your career you ended up getting paid for what you've done in the past. Right now, it's about what you do in the future. So Cole Perfetti needs to get out, needs to prove himself, and it looks like he's going to have the opportunity to do that with Scott Arniel talking about him for sure occupying a top 6 role. I don't think any of us are surprised by that, Ken. But from what you've heard from Scott Arniel, where do you see Cole Perfetti kind of fitting into this lineup? How do you see him used by a coach who talks like he's plans to use him a little bit more than the previous coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly, Scott didn't give us a handout on who his line mates were going to be, but I have to think that he did say he was going to be on the second line somewhere, noting that he could play right or left wing. So, although he did also say, and then the folks in the chat we know have been fired up about this for a long time, or Scott Arniel also saying that now that Perfetti's here, he can try out some things. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots here, and some of those folks are wondering if that means Vilardi, Ehlers, Scheifele, or does that mean Ehlers, Connor, Scheifele? We'll see. But I expect Cole Perfetti to be paired initially with Nikolai Ehlers and either Brad Lambert or Vladislav Nemesnikov. We'll see what happens. I think, Gabriel Vilardi, could he be part of that mix at some point? Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure, but I do think that would be a consideration. So I do see him playing a second line role. But Sean, I'd also say this. I mean, there's a part of me that would be intrigued on what Cole Perfetti and Mark Scheifele on a line looks like together at some point. Again, I don't think that's the primary way that they would be looking, but that's something that I would have some intrigue for me. I think you got the vision and the smarts. I think that, obviously we know that Scott Arniel would be comfortable with Vladislav Nemesnikov playing second line center, but I'm intrigued to see what Cole Perfetti and Brad Lambert looks like, Sean, at various points here of the preseason. And maybe that's as early as Friday night in the game against the Minnesota Wild that will be at Excel. For those who didn't hear, Scott Arniel saying Cole Perfetti would not play in the Wednesday game against the Edmonton Oilers, which will be game 3 of the 6 preseason games. So that's sort of where I see it. I will say I do think that Perfetti, he's going to start on the second power play right now is what it sounds like. That's where he was today. Nikolai Ehlers, having the high slot position on PP1 this afternoon or this morning with the practice that was held. Could I see Cole Perfetti moving into that job eventually on the top unit? Depending on how it goes. And Nikolai Ehlers sounds very open to wanting to play that role, but he also was quick to point out he had never played it before. So how quickly will he grasp it? We'll see. I think he's going to work really hard to make it work. So I think that Perfetti is the next person up if it doesn't work out for Ehlers and they want to move him back to the downward plane position at the point. But I do see Cole Perfetti increasing his minutes. He averaged 13 and a half minutes per game just over that last year. I see that number being way closer to the 15 or 16 minute mark. Could be even higher, but I do think that he's going to have a substantial gain in ice time per outing. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But top 6 role is where I see him. I think that it's going to be Ehlers and Perfetti. They've played together a lot before, but we'll see what happens with how things shake down with that top unit. What about you? Where do you see him fitting?
Well, I kind of want to transition, and we can talk about that through this, but I kind of want to transition to what you were talking about and the different looks that you were thinking about there. There was a time where, and maybe that time still exists, but there was a time where basically we were looking at this and we were thinking it's Perfetti, it's Ehlers, and it's maybe Brad Lambert if he can make it. Probably Vladislav Nemesnikov, the way things turned out last season, and that's kind of the reason for that is there seems to be a block the way there was for years where you were playing Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler together. And usually that was with Kyle Connor. That block seems to still exist or did at least last year in Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele staying together. We talked about it on this podcast last year. I was kind of astounded last year when Nick Ehlers moves up for an injured Kyle Connor, plays alongside Mark Scheifele and Gabe Vilardi, and they absolutely tear it up. And I have a conversation with Nick Ehlers in which we both kind of marvel at the idea that he's been around for the better part of a decade in the top 6 and somehow in that time had never really played before with Mark Scheifele, one of two centers in the top six. I think that there's something that goes on here. Sorry, I don't want to say it like that. I think Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor like playing together. And I think it's hard to break up that block. And because of that, you can talk about a top six, but it's usually a top three or top two, and then a top four, and however you can jumble those together. What is your thought process on what it means for someone like Nick Ehlers, someone like Gabe Vilardi, someone like Cole Perfetti, in the idea that it sure sounds like Scott Arniel wants to take those names and jumble them around in a bag a little bit more than we've seen in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have a slightly different viewpoint from where you're coming from. And again, I just use this because when Rick Bowness arrived, Sean, I mean, when I was in Banff with the team between the end of the preseason and the start of the regular season, Nikolai Ehlers started that year with Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele. But unfortunately for Ehlers, he was hurt in the second or third game of the season, and it just never got back on track. But so I don't think this is just a Scott Arniel thing, but it definitely has been something that over the years, we know the preference of Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor to play on the same line together. So that we're not discounting. But I mean, over the course of time and when Pierre-Luc Dubois was here, Sean, I mean, Dubois and Connor and Perfetti actually played together for, a steady amount of time before Perfetti had, one of his season-ending injuries. So I think the open-mindedness is certainly welcome from the player side of things for sure. We'll see how it plays out. I mean, there have been certain times where different guys have played well together. And again, like I said earlier, I think that, Gabriel Vilardi, I think he does a lot of things that, I like Vilardi because of his board play and his ability to get to the net and his hands in tight. I think that with a larger sample size, I think that the line could work with Mark Scheifele and Nikolai Ehlers. I also think that Gabriel Vilardi would be an incredibly effective player alongside Cole Perfetti or alongside Nikolai Ehlers, which he was when Mark Scheifele was in the middle and Kyle Connor was injured. So I think there are a lot of combinations, and I don't think this is not something that needs to be from game 1 to game 82. You need a trio together. I know that some people believe you'd rather have continuity and chemistry. That's fine. But I think there are going to be times during the year where shaking up the lines makes sense. And those guys having an opportunity to, stake their claim to more first line minutes, I think that's a welcome thing from, we know it's a welcome thing from the fan base, in terms of the players that are involved. And again, Sean, I think too, not to get too deep into the weeds here, but given the fact that Nikolai Ehlers is in a contract year, if the Jets want to keep him around beyond this season, I think that making some time for him with Mark Scheifele is one of those ways that could make it more appealing for Nikolai Ehlers to stick around beyond this season, don't you?
Oh, you absolutely nail it there, because to me, as it stands, the opportunity that has been provided to Nick Ehlers thus far in his career, I do not believe is enough to keep him staying in Winnipeg, right? This isn't I don't like Winnipeg, I don't like the city kind of thing. It's I kind of want to see how the rest of the league views me and what kind of opportunities are out there, because no doubt my opportunities have been limited here. So it's an interesting year for Scott Arniel in the idea that he this comes out to me because he basically says, when he takes over, he points to Nikolai Ehlers as a guy that's really important to the Jets, and that he thinks that there's more juice left in that orange, right? So I would fully expect that there's going to be some attempts this year to try and do that. But the one thing that I'll say, and I don't know if this is an organizational thing with the Winnipeg Jets, where maybe they give their players a little bit more say than other organizations would do in these kind of things, or the fact that maybe sometimes the Jets players are just a little bit more vocal in who they want to play with. Like, let's be honest with ourselves. We watched for years, Ken, while Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler not only were on the same line together over and over again, but in practice, they would run all their drills so that they ran the drills together at the same time. They were attached at the hip. They did everything together. There was not going to be an opportunity to break those players up. So that's where Mark Scheifele comes from. We know he likes playing with Kyle Connor. Connor. So does that make that a block that can't be moved? And, when you're talking about 12 players in a roster, there's a lot of movement to happen. But when you've got a third line that is basically a strength of yours, like this team is, those are three guys that we saw last year that were locked together and you can't move around. So when you've got the top six and two guys in that top six essentially say they want to play together, it makes it a lot harder to move those pieces around. So I'm fascinated to see if this is Scott Arniel deciding, I want to come in, I maybe want to shake things up. Like you said, Ken, Rick Bowness started out with Ehlers up there. An injury changed it. He had 2 years to change it back and didn't really do it. Only did it when an injury happened, had great success, and still changed it when that happened. So I'm interested to see if the philosophy that it sounds like Scott Arniel is wanting to move forward with is going to kind of create change, or if we're just going to kind of spin the wheel and land right back to where we've started when it comes to that, unity, that block of Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor.
Yes, sir. We got Elliotte in the green room here. Let's get him in. We don't know how long we have him for.
Yeah, well, hey, it sounds like Elliotte has shown some concern with the Kenny and Renny Show.
He has.
At least one of the pairing is a little bit vapid, a little bit vacuous. So he's come in to make sure that he's going to add some depth to the show, which I'm sure, Ken, you're sick of pulling on that rope all by yourself. So let's bring him into
I need some help. Yeah,
right now. Bring in the help for Ken. Great to see you, Elliotte. It's really great to see you and to hear from you.
I gotta say, himbo is not an insult. I have to say, like there were guys I grew up with. If you called them himbo, Sean, they really loved it because that meant that they felt they were very attractive.
That's just it. Himbos are happy with being called a himbo because it means you're attractive, and all a himbo cares about is whether or not they're attractive or not. Himbo, by definition, is an attractive man who is vacuous or lacking of substance. So
really?
Anyways, we can move on from that because otherwise, I may walk off this show at this stage.
It looks great, Sean. I got to tell you, it looks fantastic. It really does suit you.
I told him it was a compliment. I told him he doesn't believe it.
I completely and totally forgive you. Hey, let's get into this right off the bat. Cole Perfetti on the ice here. You were really leading the charge on a lot of the stuff that we were hearing out of that. Of course, I loved the line that you talked about when you were talking behind the scenes and heard it was like, the nicest standoff that we've seen. I forget the verbiage of it, but this was supposed to be, a real nice situation between the two sides. And then it kind of dragged into camp. And I think we started questioning how nice things were behind the scenes. How did we get to the point where Cole Perfetti missed almost a week's worth of camp? And where do you see the two sides kind of lining up as maybe, are they still happy with each other? Are they a little bit miffed? Where do we stand now that this is in the rearview mirror?
Now I think, Sean, it's put in the back burner. The deal is done. Cole, I mean, you guys saw him today. He looked really happy to be there. Like one of the things that I always look at now in our new world is player signs. They're a couple days late to camp because the contract couldn't get done. What happens on social media? And Perfetti was all over the Jets feeds today, and he looked happy. So I think for right now, we worry about this again in a year or when he's eligible for an extension or somewhere down the road. But look, I think this was in danger of going into a potentially bad place. I think both the Jets and Perfetti's representatives realized that this could go into a very bad place, and they got a deal done. And you know what? It's a fair contract. It's probably a little lower than what Perfetti's camp wanted, probably a little higher than what the Jets camp wanted. But as we all know from our negotiations, if someone's a little bit unhappy but mostly happy, then you're in a good spot.
Your Gord Kirkism right there, Elliotte.
What
are some of the benefits? Again, I know Perfetti reiterated today he would have been open to long-term. What are the benefits to him on going into a long-term, talks the next time around versus now, given how much money is going to be in the pot and maybe with some of the uncertainty with several key players on the Jets who need new deals in the next 2 years, whether that's Nikolai Ehlers and Kyle Connor to name the two big ones?
Well, Ken, I don't even know if a long-term deal was ever really discussed here. Like, I never got the sense. And again, like the two people who know the best are Kevin Cheveldayoff and Kurt Overhart, the agent. But I never, at no time during this did I hear that it was going to be a long-term deal. So I'm not sure that was even really on the table more than just discussed, conceptually or anything like that. Well, so next time he'll be after year 5, and the closer you get to 7, which is how many years you have to play, the more the leverage tips towards the player, right? So I think the Jets know that, unless you want to do a 1-year contract next time, you want a term. And I'm sure everybody's goal after this contract is over is something with term that keeps them in Winnipeg. Like, I think the thing that's important here is that I have no doubt that Perfetti was frustrated, but I don't think that anything happened here that would damage his long-term relationship with the Jets. Like, had this gone on another week, or we were talking about the beginning of the season, then I think you worry. But I don't think anything. I mean, did he learn that maybe the Jets are tough negotiators? Yeah, he probably did. Did he go through this for the first time, and will it affect how he thinks about it the second time? Yeah, it probably will. But I don't think anything happened here that you'd have to worry about would endanger the long-term relationship between Perfetti and the Jets.
Switching gears here a little bit to the offseason, or the kind of quiet offseason that the Winnipeg Jets had. I know Kevin Cheveldayoff and Scott Arniel had both alluded to the idea that with the salary cap going up, there was a little bit more money out there. And I think it gave a lot of teams a lot of options, which meant that the Jets had more competition. They basically watched, 4 established players walk away. And without saying it out loud, it sure seems to me like they've hinted that they really
Yeah.
tried to go out there and be, make something happen, and never happened. And thus they've kind of been forced to position into maybe potentially trying some youth in some spots that they would have maybe rather had some veterans in there. What can you tell us about maybe some of the swings and the misses, or at least the activity that the Jets tried to pull off in the offseason?
Well, the one I definitely know that they really tried to, and I think it's been reported, has been Adam Henrique. Like, I think he was a guy that they seriously went after. They were very aggressive in their pursuit of him. I know that I can't remember exactly when Henrique signed. That whole day is just like a blur to me. But I do remember that at times during that day, there were people who thought that Henrique may legitimately end up in Winnipeg. And there were a few teams that went hard after Henrique, but the Jets were absolutely one of them. So that is a player I know they took a long look at. I think the thing is, I do believe Cheveldayoff and the Jets tried to be aggressive. That's the one that stands out for me off the top of my head. I think when you look at the team, just because they didn't get anything accomplished as much as they accomplished in the summer, Sean, doesn't mean they can't continue to try to accomplish things once the year starts. Like the Heinola thing, like, that's brutal. I feel terrible for the player. But like, the thing that we've seen in the past with the Jets is when they think they have a good team and when they think they have a shot, they go for it. And they're going to have the opportunity this year, if they like their group, to go for it. One thing I really went back to was when I was in Prague, we spoke with Niederreiter, and the one thing that he really talked about a lot was the way he felt they absolutely, like, fell apart in the first round of the playoffs. And you go back and you look at it, and they were facing a steamroller in Colorado. But the thing he talked about was that when things went badly, they lost the ability to get back to what had been good for them all year. And I think that when you have a result like that, I think sometimes the way you figure out that and attack that is just as important as who you go out and get sometimes.
You mentioned Prague, and you're in Henderson, Nevada for the other part of the tour. I mean, what's the buzz around the league and the people that you talk to about the Jets going into the year, and maybe what are the thoughts about Scott Arniel taking over from Rick Bowness after he retired from coaching?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who like Arniel as a coach. Like, he's been around a long time. He's seen a lot of things. I don't think a lot of people were surprised that Scott Arniel got the Jets job, put it that way. I know they looked around a little bit, but I remember the moment it happened, most people figured he would be the head coach, and he is. I don't think that really shocked anyone. To be honest, there wasn't a ton of chatter about Winnipeg. I mean, look, like, everybody's still talking about Edmonton. Everybody expects Vegas to reload and come back at the rest of the league. In the Western Conference, there's still Colorado, there's still Dallas. I know Vancouver's gone through a bit of change, but I think people really still like their team. I think the Jets are going to probably have to fight to prove their spot again, and I don't think they expect anything differently. Getting Perfetti done is a big deal. I'll tell you, actually, this weekend, what I was talking with somebody about is Brad Lambert, and in Toronto, this is what he said to. This is what this guy said to me. I remember when Toronto drafted Matthew Nyes. Matthew Nyes was a really big prospect heading into his draft year, and he had a bad year. And now, like Matthew Nyes, I think he's going to be one of the breakout players in the NHL this year. I think he's gotten bigger, he's gotten stronger. I remember when Toronto got him in the second round, there were people who were saying to me, in 5 years, that pick is going to be a steal. And because it was just recency bias. He had a bad year, so people were down on him. I look at Brad Lambert, and it looks like he's going to get a chance to play some high level C here this year. And that's the toughest position to start. You face great when you're a high center. You face, like, look at all the guys he's going to have to play in the Western Conference, like, pretty quickly. But what he said to me is that, like, when a few years ago when he said Nyes was the guy who everybody was going to regret not taking, he wonders if Lambert's going to be that guy. Like, he saw something in Lambert last year that he's going to wonder if a lot of the teams that passed on Lambert are going to look back and say, boy, the Jets, they made the right pick. They benefited from what everybody else didn't want to do. And I'm very curious to see what type of experiment we see with Brad Lambert and how long it goes.
To that point that you're talking about, who he's going to have to play against, Ken, there was that moment at practice today where he squared off against Adam Lowry, and Adam Lowry just kind of gave him a little bit of a shove, and he went flying. And our colleague had said, that's on, say, Kopitar, that's Draisaitl. Like, that's what he's got to get ready for. And sometimes when you've got an Adam Lowry out on the ice and you've got these kids, you can see there's a real difference between a man, and Adam Lowry is a man. And it just kind of highlights the high level that Brad Lambert is going to have to get to if he can get into that position. Elliotte, I want to kind of go back to something you had touched on, Ville Heinola, and I think you'd kind of hinted to the idea of the Jets, not being afraid to make moves. Maybe it didn't happen in the summer. Maybe it happens early in the season around Christmas time, whatever. But I wanted to get your take on it, because if you take a look at this Jets team, even with the loss of the Toffoli's and the Sean Monahans, the lineup that they're returning is very, very similar to the one that they had at the beginning of last year, except on defense, where they lose Nate Schmidt, who is in and out of the lineup, but I thought was really good defensively when he was in, and Brennan Dillon, who I think is a big loss. Some people would suggest the Jets defense was one of the things that got exposed in the playoffs last year. And I think it's pretty hard not to look at them and say they've taken a step back. How do you think the Jets spell off, or how do you think they perform with what they have right now?
Well, I'm like some people I saw, like, knowing I was coming on today, when I got the invitation from Ken, I was like, oh, this is the first of 45 this year, so I gotta get ready. And secondly, I started looking around, just making sure, is there anything I'm missing or anything I'm missing? And I see a lot of people there who seem to be kind of down on Winnipeg. Like, I'm not. Number one, you have the eraser back there, and I know the one thing I really believe about Hellebuyck is, as great a regular season as he had a disappointing playoffs, and I think guys like him come back better from that. And that's one thing that Hellebuyck can clean up a lot of your mistakes as you figure it out. The thing that disappoints me for Heinola is that I think if there's one thing the Jets really have to do is, you've got to start showing to your own prospects that you're going to get opportunities there. Now, I know Cheveldayoff has said that he doesn't really have a clear answer on why McGroarty didn't want to leave or didn't want to stay, but I do believe that was one of the factors, is that McGroarty looked at it and said, prospects don't get to Winnipeg as quickly. So I think that, Sean, for me, what I'm doing is, there's two ways to solve your problem. You can solve it from within, or you can trade to solve your problem. And I think the first thing you should always do, Sean, is try to solve it from within. Now, you lost a key body. That really stinks. But I would, unless you get a great deal or some good waiver player falls on your lap, I think you probably sit there and say, we're going to try to solve it from within at first.
Yeah, and speaking of deals, Elliotte, I mean, Sean and I have been pretty impressed by Braden Yager so far.
Yeah,
What's the industry think about that? Making the best of that situation involving
he made a
McGroarty
great
and
deal. You guys made a great deal, considering that everybody knew. Like one of the things, like one of the toughest things I think that Cheveldayoff had to navigate with that is that when those things get out, then it really puts you in a bad spot. Like it really does. It makes it hard for you to make a good deal. I mean, I don't know that he could have made a better deal for that one. I remember, so I have a friend who's a big Penguins fan. And when I mentioned that I heard McGroarty was getting traded to Pittsburgh, it was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And he goes, "What's the return?" And I said, "I don't know yet. I'm working on it." And he goes, "Just don't tell me it's Jaeger." And I said, "I don't know. Like honestly, I don't know." So I got later on, I found out it was Jaeger, and he was so happy when he traded for McGroarty, and he was so crushed when they traded Jaeger. So if that's what a Penguins fan feels, I honestly thought he made the best deal he could in a really tough situation, because the moment those things go public, it really makes it hard for you to make a great deal.
I'm interested, switching gears, in your kind of global view of the West. Now, I take a look at a team like Chicago, who was really, really busy in the
Yeah,
offseason, and Utah, who looked like they were trying to add, and even a team like San Jose, I felt was a little more aggressive than I would have thought they would be at this
yeah.
point. It's a way of saying I feel like there was a lot of free spaces on the bingo card in the West last year, and all of a sudden they don't look so free anymore. And in the meantime, a team like the Avalanche, I think, takes a little bit of a step back, and the defense for the Dallas Stars looks like it's taken a step back, although Ottinger could be the eraser in that situation there. Feels to me like the top end and the bottom end have kind of crushed down. What's your view of the West and the basically where everyone has positioned themselves going into the year?
The one thing I agree with you, Sean, is that I think the bottom of the West is better. I like the way you described it as, like, free bingo spaces in some cases last year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Like even Anaheim, they've got a lot of kids, and while they're still really young, they got a lot of talent there, and they really try. They took a big swing at Marchessault, and they tried to get him, and they were disappointed they didn't get him. So I do think San Jose is better. But I don't think they're anywhere near a playoff team. I think Chicago's better. I don't think they're a playoff team. I think Anaheim's going to be better simply because they're older, but I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I still think Edmonton's very good. I still think Vancouver's very good. I still think Dallas is very good. I still think Colorado is very good. I mean, Nashville is, I think, obviously should be a lot better. I think the West was always hard. It's still going to be really, really hard. Like it's going to be a really, really hard division. But I mean, you guys have like Hellebuck. Look, forget like people say, I didn't have a great playoff. Okay, but you still have to get to the playoffs. And Hellebuck is a nuclear weapon in your hands. And I'm betting there's you guys have a lot of guys who take hockey very seriously. I think that's important, and you have a lot of talent there. And the other thing too is that you mentioned him briefly. I read Ehlers' quote today about you guys keep trying to get stuff out of me, and I've got nothing to tell you. Um, it's a huge season for him. Like he's playing for his next contract, and I think players in those positions are highly motivated to do well for themselves.
And just one quick one. I mean, it's down the road a bit, but I mean, you touched on some of the Jets players, Elliotte, with Four Nations coming up. I mean, do you see that? I mean, Josh Morrissey, we expect to be part of it. Mark Scheifele's going to be in the discussion, but how big a motivating factor could it be for Mark? I mean, not only is he going into the first year of the new contract, but I mean, this is a guy who's wanted to play for Canada for a long time, and suddenly there's a logjam at forward on the edges of the roster because of all the high end talent.
Oh, I think it's a huge motivating factor. Honestly, Ken, like players have been talking about it. The players are going to play. The Czechs aren't in this tournament, but like speaking to a number of them when they won the Worlds last year, it's like it's about time that we're getting this back at the biggest level. And you take a look at Crosby's camp in Vail, McKinnon's there, Marner's there, McDavid's there, and all these guys are trying to skate with each other. Like it's a huge, huge thing. I'll say this. I think there's one guy I was talking about with someone this week. I wonder if Adam Lowry is on Team Canada's radar. Like, I think Scheifele, absolutely. The thing about Hellebuck is the U.S. is loaded in goal. Now with Demko being hurt, like, you don't know what his situation is, but Hellebuck's got to be thinking, I'm their starter, right? So I've got to have a monster start to the year. Scheifele, absolutely, and don't forget too, like, a lot of these coaches, they'll take extra centers. Like, they have no trouble with centers playing the wing. They love to have centers. But the guy I was thinking also for Winnipeg, because I actually did homework before this interview, was Adam Lowry. Like, I could see Team Canada's coaches loving a guy like Adam Lowry for Team Canada.
Yeah. Elliotte, always really appreciate you coming in. It's a pleasure to have you. A great way for us to kind of kick off this year. And listen, message received. I understand the tough love. I've got a haircut appointment for 6 o'clock tomorrow.
Don't do it.
It's gone.
Don't
It
do
is
it.
gone. You've bullied me into it. This is on you. I hope you can sleep tonight, because I know I won't be able to. But regardless, hey, I really appreciate you coming on. Great work as usual. It's great to have you back, my friend.
Well, it's great to see you guys too. Another great successful year for you guys. And if I can get you to get a haircut, and my next is like, Ken, buy a mic stand, for crying out loud. Like, you can get one for $5.99. You don't have to hold it for an hour and a half.
I do have one, but we'd better audio this way. But thank you. Appreciate you doing the homework. Great job with your new host so far, and enjoy the season, my friend.
All right, guys, we'll see you plenty. And I love to see the Canadian teams do well. So I'm hoping it's no different for the Jets.
Excellent. See you, bud. Let's launch into it, because let's do some quick hits with a bunch of the different ones. Let's get into Lambert right away. What are you seeing from Brad Lambert?
Just first of all, I mean, the on ice is going to take care of itself. And, I would say that, we don't like to overreact by first viewings and everything else. I saw a few things in the Saturday's game that I liked from Lambert. And then there were some things where there were times where he was maybe a little bit tentative, or maybe trying to be, responsible first or whatever else when he was playing with Alex Iafallo and Gabriel Velarde. But first of all, Sean, what's impressed me most about Lambert is off the ice. He's a guy that I talked to last year when he was with the Moose. I went down and did an interview with him at practice. He seems very comfortable this year. There's just a maturity that is around him, or surrounding him, if you will. And I really think that he understands the opportunity that is available to him. Secondly, we talked so much, Sean, and Elliotte touched on it, the steamroller that is the Avalanche. And you and I are both we had the benefit of being there to watch the Avalanche win that Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. We know they play at warp speed. So to me, the Jets were too slow in that series against the Avalanche. So that's where the guy with the skill set like Brad Lambert can provide a neutralizing factor, if you will, or something that can really help them in that quest to get a little bit faster. Now, again, it's all about how the Lambert processes and handles his down low responsibilities and all those things. But to me, I think there's a great opportunity for him. And I would also say this, and this is not to suggest that he's not going to be on the opening day roster, because he still is very much a candidate to be one. It's more important for Brad Lambert to be ready to play in the NHL at game 60 to 82 and then be ready for the playoffs than it is for him to be in the opening day lineup. And again, I'm not suggesting that he is not going to be, but if at some point this year he has to spend some time going down to the minors and dominating, that doesn't mean he's not going to be ready later on, and maybe sooner than later. But I do still think that he is a good candidate to be on the opening night roster. I do think he will get a longer leash here to show that he can do it. And I just think that, Elliotte touched on it, but Sean, when you work out with Gary Roberts, that's a big thing for a young player like Lambert, who went through, some challenges in his draft year, as we've mentioned here. So to me, I think he's in a good place. I do expect him to play better and better as this training camp moves along. But again, we know it's a steep learning curve. But I do think that a guy like Lambert is going to be a factor with the Jets this year. And like I said, whether it's in game 1 or game 10 or game 60, that will remains to be seen. But I see big progress from Brad Lambert, and I do see him being a part of this team, and an important one when it comes to secondary scoring.
First time I believe I saw Brad Lambert, I think he was a 16-year-old playing with the Finnish junior team
Yep.
at the World Juniors, and you could see it at that time. Like, he was a stud. I expected him to go top 3 that year. Now, he seemed to get lost for a little bit. For people who don't know the history of this kid, I know the Finnish journalists that I speak with had thought he'd made a lot of really bad decisions, went to a team that he probably shouldn't have gone to, put himself in a real bad spot, and they were kind of questioning his his navigation of his hockey career, and that's why you see him drop the way he did. The Jets picking him up where they picked him up, this was one of these situations. They have 2 first-round picks. They go with Rucker McGroarty with their first one, so the second one's kind of a freebie where they can say, hey, we know that there's some doubts around this kid, but we're going to take a flyer on the skill. That's clearly paid off. And last year, I think he was the youngest player over that. I forget what the stat is, but for the amount of points that he had, he was one of the youngest players in the league doing that. So he's clearly coming along. You take a look at what I'm seeing from this player is clearly NHL speed, NHL hands, gets the puck, doesn't panic with the puck. There's so much stuff that he does well. He's going to be a really great player in this league. The question is he ready for it now? So I go to things like we saw today where he kind of got manhandled by Adam Lowry and looked a little bit surprised that it was happening. Is he going to be able to handle the, the Kopitars and the Draisaitl's of the league? That's a tall ask for a player like that. The other part about him, and listen, I need to see him in more games. But when I saw him in the first preseason game, what I see is sometimes the complaint that people will have about a Nikolai Ehlers, and that he's got that crazy speed in the hands and the shot and all those different kind of things. Just at times it can look like it's a little detached from his line mates or even the rest of the unit out on the ice. That's what I saw in game 1. A lot of people were, really, texting me and sending me messages and saying, oh yeah. And to me, he's eye popping, and he's eye popping for good reasons that are going to spell future success for this player. Speed, hands, all the kind of things that I mentioned before. The question is going to be, can you have a second line center whose job is to drive that second line, to be the defensive conscience on that line, to be the guy who sets everybody else up when you're a little bit detached from everybody else. Sometimes if you've got a winger who's a little bit detached from everyone else on the ice, but they're speeding up and down that wing, you can get away with that because the other 2 units can do their thing. I liken it to the way that Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor kind of play hockey with each other, and Gabe Vilardi just goes to the front of the net, and that's where he needs to be to capitalize on what happens. Not saying that there aren't some, combinations that would work. And that's why I find this training camp fascinating, Ken, because Scott Arniel's open to the idea of trying different things. And so what that means is there's 5 or 6 or 7 different players that you're going to get Brad Lambert to have a look with to see if something clicks, to see if someone can make sense of what he does. And then can you use that pairing to make him stick in the NHL and be valuable? As of right now, though, I'm taking a look at a player that has all the tools, but is trying to make that tool fit in with the rest of the toolbox. I haven't seen that yet. I need to see more from camp from this player before I think that that's something that can happen. It's a long way of saying, maybe he starts with the season with the team. Maybe they even try him out at 2C like they did with Perfetti last year, but I very much expect that we're going to see Vladislav Nemesnikov as the second line center of this Jets team 10 games into the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of the options they have available to them. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. And again, the next 4 games, we're going to see mostly, much more of a veteran lineup from the Jets here. We didn't see much of it in the first 2 games. So, I mean, that's when you need to see Lambert succeeding with, guys like whether it's Ehlers or Perfetti. Or
yeah.
One thing I would say here, and I don't see the Jets going with the Nick Patan model here, where he starts on the 4th line and then plays on the second power play unit as a way to make it work. I'm not ruling it out, but I think they would prefer to send him down to the minors and have him playing first line minutes if that's not working out. But I think that he'll start the season as the second line center, unless he shows in the next while that he's maybe not ready for that role. But I think he's going to show that he's ready.
Well, and I think to Elliotte's point and the kind of kerfuffle that the Rucker McGroarty camp seem to try to make, I don't think there's anything the Jets would love more than to have Brad Lambert come up, keep him in the lineup, and him find a way to stick around with this team to kind of stick it to all the people out there who are trying to say there's no opportunities for young guys on this team. How would it look to the Rucker McGroarty camp if they fled Winnipeg for fear that they don't give opportunities to their younger players, only to see that the second first-round pick that the Jets took behind Rucker McGroarty made the team in McGroarty's absence? I think that would be something the Jets would absolutely love to happen.
And McGroarty may end up in Wilkes-Barre to start the year, depending on how his camp goes, right? So, I mean, that's the other flip side of the equation there.
No
based
doubt.
Based on what Mike Sullivan said earlier.
I just wanted to tease this. We're going to have a season full of pristine roofing wake-up calls again, but a story we cannot wait to share with you about pristine roofing as it relates to the Kenny and Renny Show. We will do that on the opening day, but in the meantime, you know the drill. If you want to have your roof done, need to have your roof done, siding, exteriors, all those kind of things, North End Rick is the guy to get a hold of at 1-204-981-6289. You know what I was loving, Ken? The story that we found out at our Kenny and Renny end last year is the bosses at Pristine Roofing. I think they're a little jealous of North End Rick because they keep getting approached and saying like, hey, are you North End Rick? And now North End Rick's a celebrity around Pristine Roofing, and the guys who are, you know, the big dogs behind the scenes, they've been outshone by North End Rick. Amazing how those things can happen. I wanted to say we're looking forward to another season with Cambrian Credit Union, the near Kenny and Renny OG's been there for a long time and remaining with us this season again, as we remain loyal customers of theirs, Ken, with their unfee accounts, daughters, wives, father-in-laws on my end, you and Stacy on your end with accounts there, and of course both of us with our mortgage there. Like I said, they set it up so I could allow a big fat balloon payment on my mortgage, so that was nice. And you should give Sweet Lou a shout out before we do move on.
Yeah, you bet. For folks who have realty needs you'd like to have met, contact our main man, Lou Furlan, at Real LePage and Ambic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@loufurlan.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Furlan, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of this community. I want
to dive into Ville Heinola. That
sure.
completely sucks. I don't know that we're all waiting to see where this is going, but you can kind of tell by the way that the coaches are talking about it that this is a worrisome situation for them. Elliotte talked about it on their show and the concern of like, I think, and this is not Elliotte speaking specific to the situation, but in the cases where you have, you know, infection of the bone around screws, the worry becomes degeneration of the bone. And that's a massive, massive problem. Not saying that that's happening in this case, but when you have infection surrounding the screws like Ville Heinola has, that's one of the things you need to be concerned about. Hoping that he is able to get back into the lineup. Would have fully expected him here. Ken, how's this? I wanted to share this one with you. Ville Heinola, had he been in the lineup, and we can get to talking about what's going to cover that off, but had he been in the lineup, I would have been expecting a top six of the likes of Morrissey, DeMello, Pionk, Samberg, Heinola, and Colin Miller is probably what I'm seeing as the opening day starting six. How you structure that seems to be fairly obvious. Sounds like it's going to be Samberg moving up alongside Pionk, Morrissey staying the same on top with DeMello, and then you would have had a Ville Heinola with the Colin Miller. My concern, if that's where they were going or are going to be going in the future, I think I've made it fairly clear here, because we talk about Nate Schmidt leaving, and a lot of people are like, well, it's not that big of a deal. He was out of the lineup quite often, which he was. I think that when he and Dylan Samberg were on the ice together, they were a real shutdown force. The analytics suggested that, one of the better ones in the league. And I thought that was extremely valuable for a team that's identity was snuffing out offense on the other team. And so having, you know, that second line pairing able to go out and do their thing, and Josh Morrissey free to do what he does on the top end, and basically being able to say in almost any situation we can put out this third pairing and they'll maybe be our best shot at shutting down the other team offensively, was really valuable. I don't see that existing with a third pairing of Ville Heinola and Miller. So And the other part about this is Ville Heinola's a little bit of a different type of player in that he kind of gives you what Josh Morrissey does, maybe even a little bit of what Neil Pionk does. And it's, the question I think has always been how he fits in that lineup. I had thought that the best way to bring Ville Heinola in the lineup to not have him kind of, overly concerned about the mistakes that he makes, but still freeing him up to do what he does best, which is move the puck, to get up into the plate, to be a little bit of an offensive force. I had thought the best configuration of the Jets defense would have been to go Josh Morrissey and Neil Pionk, which we've seen work in the past. Ville Heinola alongside Dylan DeMello, who has acted as the defensive conscience and done wonders in opening up Josh Morrissey's ability to move the puck and get down the ice, and then take Samberg and keep him in that shutdown role on the third pairing alongside Colin Miller. I had thought that was the best way to utilize Ville Heinola. I'm interested in your take. You can respond to that if you want, but I'm interested in how you thought Ville Heinola was going to be brought in and how he best fits and best serves a defense that I think is the biggest concern for the Jets heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this with Dylan DeMello at various points earlier on in his Jets tenure when he wasn't playing with Morrissey, where he was the safety valve helping along, whether it was Logan Stanley or whatever else. So again, yeah, I mean, that can work, but I mean, he's also proven to be the best partner for Morrissey. So I think that I always sort of saw it Colin Miller and Heinola being the third pairing starting out. I think Colin's got a big body. He's got a big shot, pretty responsible in his own end. Can give you some power play minutes, can play on the penalty kill if you need him to. So again, this is terrible for Ville Heinola. We know this. Again, we're not doctors, but the speculation is depending on what they find out in the next while. I mean, this is something that it could require further surgery. It could be something that's in the 6 to 8 week window. We don't know that yet, but it's something that you can't rule out. So if that's the case, then the Jets are going to have to move forward. And what we know from what Scott O'Neill said, I think on day one of the on-ice sessions, is that they're planning to have their seventh defenseman a little bit more in the mix, like not like last year where Logan Stanley barely played in the first half of the year. They're planning on using, that third pairing will be in flux a little bit more than maybe we had thought in some years past when injuries weren't a factor. So that means it's a huge opportunity for Hayden Fleury, Sean. And I have actually liked Hayden Fleury quite a bit during this training camp. We know that it was a big weekend for him and his wife, delivering their second child, and Hayden, saying to me today that things are going well at home. And I love the mobility of Hayden Fleury. And Sean, one thing about Fleury, we know he's a first round pick. So, I mean, this guy's got talent. He popped as an 18-year-old already. And, he's played in some really good organizations, including Carolina and Tampa, where they were very defensively sound teams. I mean, he played in Seattle, also played a bit in Anaheim. But to me, Hayden Fleury is a guy that I think has given the Jets some additional depth on the back end. I don't think a pairing of Fleury and Miller would be a huge drop off on the third pairing. And I do agree with you that definitely the Schmidt and Samberg, man, Sean, they didn't give up a 5-on-5 goal for a long time last year. So that was a massive development for them. The reason I don't think it's as huge a drop off is because I see a bigger, role for Samberg. He's still going to be in the shutdown-ish role. He's going to be on that second pairing. He's going to see his minutes increase. He's going to be playing on the penalty kill. He's a big, strong guy. I think he could be a little bit more physical. It's the way he's played all the way up in his career, World Juniors, at college when he was winning the Frozen Four. So again, the third pairing is going to have to prove it, but I think that there's potential for Miller and Fleury, and even, like I said, they're using the seventh guy right now that looks like Logan Stanley. So he's going to have to show that he can be a regular or push for time. And I think the other thing too, Dylan Coughlin is someone, Sean, who has caught my attention during training camp. Now we'll see if he's with the Moose or if he's with the Jets, but this is a guy that I think is an NHL defenseman that does a lot of good things. He's a big bodied guy, 6'2" or 6'3", 207. So, I don't think that the Jets defense is a concern compared to the other things, but I think that their commitment to team defense, for the first half 2 years ago and for the most of the entirety of last season will help, minimize that concern is my view so far, but they're going to have to do it. I mean, that's what I see, but it's definitely going to be something that we're watching very closely. It's under the microscope for them moving forward as they start the season.
Yeah, to me, if you take a look at an overarching view at this team, they still have one of the best shutdown lines in the NHL, top 3. They still have the best goaltender on earth. They still have one of the top 5, top 7 defensemen in the NHL. They still have one of the best triggermen and shooters in the NHL. They still have an extremely capable first line center. And then that's not even getting into the likes of what Nick Ehlers is capable of, how much growth is in Velarde, right? Perfetti, how much growth is with that player, right? So I take a look at this Jets team, and let's be honest with ourselves, there's a lot of teams around the league that would take a look at all those pieces and be so happy to have all those pieces. I think the Jets have too many pieces to not be a competitive team. I wonder about this balance. I wonder where the defense is. I think, hey, Rick Bowness talked about this quite often last year, and I think that it may say something about where the Jets kind of tailed off last year and where they most definitely tailed off the year before. He talked about the style of play, which the Scott Arniel has essentially said they're going to continue this year, how hard it is. It's hard to be that team that wins because they commit to outworking the opposition every night, that the forwards commit to coming back and playing team defense rather than staying up ice and getting more goals and those kind of things. It's tiring. It's hard. And the Jets are signing up for another year of that, I think, with a diminished defense compared to what they had last year. I think you're right. They went out and they got a couple guys who are, those kind of players who have had a career of being 1 foot in the NHL and 1 foot in the AHL. And let's be honest, that was basically Nate Schmidt last season. So if, Coughlin or Miller or Fleury is going in that position, Sandberg is a player who I thought was on his way up. So, I still think there's a drop off. And honestly, I think with Brendan Dillon gone, they're going to miss that more than they think that they're going to miss it. So for me, it's this balance. How much is that going to cost you? How much more do your forwards have to pay to covering off your defense to make it work? And if you're doing that, how much less commitment is there to trying to get up ice and find offense, which is why I think Scott Arniel is doing things like putting Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor on the penalty kill. I think he's trying to find other areas that the Jets can find more goals, because the expectation is they're not going to be able to defend as well as they did last year. So if you allow more goals, but you score more goals, maybe you end up right in the exact same place. It's, a balance that they're trying to strike right now. I'm very interested in trying to see where that balance ends up. I just wanted to give some shout outs, of course, to the Kenny and Renny OGs, the Johnston group, once again, back for another season. Boy, oh boy, if you ever find someone in your life who has your back the way that the Johnston group has Kenny and Renny's, hold on to those people with all your might. And of course, bringing back the Keg, great to see them. Great place. We still haven't got out there, Ken. We got to go get out and do that. And of course, I was down at Transcanada Brewing Company, who are opening up a TCB in Brandon, folks. So soon enough, when you're out in Brandon, you'll be able to get the Nectar of the Gods when you're out there as well. But in the meantime, you can head on down to 1290 Kenniston and join them in their tap room, which I was at last year for their anniversary. Boy, it was a good one. Ken, you were overseas, so I drank enough beer for both of us.
Well
they
done.
did not.
Thank you.
They did not miss you, at least in the amount of money that they brought in, no doubt. A couple quick hits before we go here. Do you think Rasmus Kupari is in danger of falling to the AHL?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about that. I wouldn't say that it's something that's at the top of my list right now. Kelly Moore and I were standing together on Friday, Sean, I think in the second session, and he had one of those moves that I like to tell you that he catches your attention in camp, but I don't think you saw it. I think you were at the other rink watching on the other side. So that's one thing that I saw, but there's going to need to be more of those, Sean. There's going to need to be more of those moments that catch your attention. I would say today we learned that, it looked like Kupari was at least part of the penalty killing group. If Rasmus Kupari is going to be in the NHL, he's going to have to do one of several things. He's going to have to check really well, or score, or probably most likely have a combination of both of those things.
Yeah.
He's going to have to carve out a role for himself. He had a role with the LA Kings on sort of a shutdown line, but that's something that he's going to need to do well. again, I think there still would be interest in him in terms of a waiver claim if he gets to that point. But I mean, we'll see. I think that Kupari is a guy that is on the bubble for sure. I think he's got a skill set that can be valuable to the Winnipeg Jets. Again, like we talked about before, they want to get faster. He is a speedy player. So as long as he can process the game along with his feet, there's a player that's in there. But again, he's in competition. He's in competition not only with David Gustafsson, but Sean, a laundry list of other guys: Jared Anderson-Dolan, Mason Shaw, Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, Dominic Toninato. The list is long when it comes to where things are at. I mean, but at the same time, Scott O'Neill told us that it was going to be most likely 13 forwards, 7 defensemen.
Right.
And we already know the Jets don't want to go into LTIR. So Ville Heinola, because he's at a comfortable cap number around $1 million, he won't be he can be on IR, but you're still paying. That's still part of the cap number. So to have a 22-man roster isn't even going to be as big a benefit as it was going into the year where they thought they were already going to use that number. So if they only have 13 forwards, especially now with Perfetti being signed, a player that has either been in the organization is going to be subject to waivers. And whether that's Kupari or somebody else, I'm not certain, but we know the Jets valued him back to his draft year, and we know they valued him in the PLD trade, but you're going to have to show that you need to force your way into the discussion. Otherwise, there's a potential for trade or waivers if that comes to that.
Well, the interesting part about him is what may potentially give him opportunity is the idea that without being settled with your second line center position, that Vladislav Nemeskov vacates the fourth line and goes up to the second line, which gives him an opportunity. Except I think that he's been passed on that depth chart by David Gustafsson, which probably puts him as a winger. I wonder if you start getting into the idea of, in an effort to go with youth, to try and boost scoring and things like that. I wonder if you don't start being drawn into competition with a guy like Chibrikov, right? Who's got that little bit of an edge, who seems like he'd be able to play both up and down the lineup and give you a little bit of freedom of where you can move him. I know they're different hands, these two players, but I just start wondering if there's truly this opportunity for youth. It's got to kind of exist outside of, Brad Lambert makes 2C or bust. Like if you're talking about opening up and auditioning spots for youth, what does that look like? Chibrikov is a guy who, looks like he can play up and down the lineup and has that little bit of an edge that you may want to see. Like, the thing about Rasmus Kupari is skates like the wind, creates opportunity, just never seems to be able to do anything with those opportunities. And I'm putting my money right now, if you take two players who are out there making opportunities for themselves and capitalizing on them, I'm thinking from what I've seen from Chibrikov so far, I'd put him ahead of Rasmus Kupari in that. The other thing that kind of works against him is this idea that you were talking about him doing it, the penalty killing and things like that. Well, if they're thinking of using not just Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor on the penalty kill, but even thinking of getting a guy like Ehlers out there as well. Well, who's left? We're talking about Lowry's going to take a pretty prominent spot. And then you're talking about guys like Barron and Appleton. He is Iafallo. He is way down the list now of players that you would be using for that. Being fast and, using the body can only get you so far. At some point, there's a lot of guys who are fast and can use their body. You got to take it to another level. I'll say this, as one journalist out there who may or may not have been watching the show had told me last year, Rasmus Kupari being the catalyst that was going to be the driver of the best fourth line the Winnipeg Jets have ever seen. That was a little bit of an overstatement and did not come to fruition.
A quick one. I'm a big fan of the way Nikita Chibrikov plays, Sean. That he's been very noticeable. I love the way he was patient with the puck, incredibly, heads up, a bunch of zone entries on Saturday night in that game. But for me, I just think that, again, I understand the premise maybe trying to start him in on the fourth line. But to me, where he is at in his development, I think he's much better served playing a top line role with the Manitoba Moose and then coming over to be a full-time player next year. That doesn't mean he's not getting an opportunity this year. I think he could get call-up opportunities for sure. But I mean, to me, Sean, this is not like it was 2, 3, 4 years ago when this fourth line was getting 6 minutes a night. The fourth line has projected right now, Morgan Barron and Alex Iafallo. These are both guys who are double-digit goal scorers, and whether it's Kapari or whether it's Gustafsson or somebody else works themselves into the equation. I mean, these are all guys that are capable NHL players. And I mean, Nemestikov might start the year as a fourth line center too. So I just don't see there being opportunity for Chibrikov right out of the gate, though I love the way that he plays. I love how, he gets in your face, gets in your grill, not afraid to mix it up. We saw that on day one of camp, steamrolling Kieran Walton, the 6'6" prospect. So he's not shy, but he's going to have to show that he can play that type of physical, agitating game at the NHL level eventually. I think it's more likely that he becomes a regular next year, but I expect him to get games and opportunities this year with the Winnipeg Jets for sure. So great competition there. And then, Sean, I mean, we're getting close to the end here, but what are your thoughts on the backup job now that we've seen, Kaapo Kähkönen and Eric Comrie each play one game so far, and maybe there's only, 1.5 games left to be played other than somebody named Connor Hellebuck in the preseason?
Yeah, well, I had thought right at the beginning of this, Kaapo Kähkönen is a goaltender that I thought could be one of these reclamation projects that Wade Flaherty just specializes in and takes guys from, like crashing out of their career or being relatively unknown the way Lauren Brossoit was. Comrie, I think, would be one of those guys who looked like maybe his career was starting to wind down, and then Flats got a hold of him and gave him just a great opportunity. Kaapo Kähkönen is a guy that was a really high-end prospect that people were expecting a lot out of, and I think he got caught in some bad situations, and it really affected his confidence. So this, to me, was a potential flat special. They go find a guy, get him to who I believe is one of the best goaltender coaches in the NHL to kind of help steady the ship, find himself playing not a super high pressure game behind a guy who is going to chew up 60 however many games a year, so you don't have to play that often. If you do fail, that guy's usually catching you. And David Riddick didn't look that bad when he was with the Winnipeg Jets, another guy who was on his way out. And this, to me, has like asset management written all over it. The idea that if you could get Kaapo Kähkönen and kind of rejuvenate him and get him back on his feet and kind of looking like what people thought he could, then if the trade deadline came around and there's always a team looking for goaltending depth, you could move him at that point and then bring in Eric Comrie, who that you have faith in at that stage, and maybe pick up, a second round pick or something like that out of the deal. That's what, so I honestly think Comrie was surprised when they went out and they got Kähkönen. I think he thought that there was a done deal. He was going to be the backup. I think that the Jets saw an opportunity here, which means that maybe they will go in that direction with Kaapo Kähkönen if what I think I was seeing is what was actually playing out. That said, how things have gone so far, I think Eric Comrie has the edge in the battle right now, has shown better of the two. It was a rough outing in that first preseason game for Kähkönen. So, I mean, this is one of these things. It's early in training camp. This is one of those things that if I said it's going to be this player or that player, I'd kind of be BSing, because I honestly think that the race is on right now. And what happens in the next number of preseason games is going to be what determines which of those two players is going to be backing up Connor Hellebuck. But I would suggest that if the Winnipeg Jets had their preference, Kakko would grab the brass ring. They'd try and rejuvenate him and see if they couldn't move him, and then bring in Eric Comrie towards the end of the year to be their backup heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Kähkönen definitely had the edge going into camp for sure. Slight edge, though, ever so slight, I would say. But it's still pretty open. But we'll see what happens here. I think that they're two very good options for the job, and I think that they will both be ideal kind of backup guys for Connor Hellebuck. They know what their role is. Their job is to push. I mean, if Eric Comrie can find the form that he had that earned him the contract with, that was 920-ish save percentages last year with the Jets. Hey, if they get that version of Comrie and he can give them 19 to 22 starts, great. But Kähkönen is a guy who like you said, I mean, I love the conversation we had with Kevin Woodley of In Goal Magazine and NHL.com about Kähkönen and his underlying numbers on bad teams. So again, it's one game for each of the guys, and against weaker lineups. So let's see how they play when it gets going. And again, these guys are under the microscope every day at practice. So to me, I don't think I'm with you. The job is still pretty open here, and I don't see the Jets holding 3 goalies on the roster. So it's up to those two guys to sort it out.
Ken, let's commit to doing a before the season start to this rather than starting in game one, after I said here. Well, we'll do a breakdown,
Preview for sure,
a review of everything that we think is going to happen. We'll get to that. Other than that, it's been enjoyable to be here and get the juices flowing. Can't wait to get back. Can't wait till everything gets into the swing. Want to thank Elliotte Friedman, who thinks I'm handsome, and that's about it. And then other than that, came and gave us some great analysis here.
Hey, learn how to take a compliment, would you? We'll learn how to take a compliment.
And listen, you can stick up for him all you want.
I will.
Yes, you will. Well, that's good. That'll keep him coming on the show because, boy, I wasn't going to ask him, so it's a good thing that you did. Anyway, thanks to Elliotte. Thank you to Ken. Thank you to the audience for being back. We love to see you. And we're looking forward to more. So the next time you will see us will be on our season preview. We will let you know when that will be as soon as we can. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.